everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. Just going to give everybody just 1 or 2 more minutes to come on. And so take this time to hit the bathroom one more time, grab that big glass of water or cup of tea or whatever you want to have while you watch this webinar tonight. And we will get started in about 2 minutes. It's like that awkward moment, right, everyone, where we're just kind of waiting.
It's like when you say goodbye to somebody, but you're still walking next to them for the next couple of minutes.
Okay, so if you're here with us tonight, let me see where you're from. Just tell us your state. Put it in the chat. Oh, here we go. Coming in. Nice, Maryland. Yay, Maryland. Colorado, Georgia. Wow, we got a mix. Thanks, guys. Is this helpful, Andre, for you to see all the different states that you might have to be dealing with pretty soon?
I don't know if that's sarcasm or if that's being serious there.
Serious.
Some of those names I recognize already.
Rhode Island, nice. Oregon, Washington. Oh, Washington. Well, thank you guys for chatting and letting us know you're out there and listening. It's fun for us. And I'm going to go ahead and get us started, and people who join will be able to jump into the conversation. So it is wonderful to have you all here with us this evening. My name is Amanda Garzon, and I'm the Chief Operations Officer here at the Hydrocephalus Association. The Hydrocephalus Association and the Spina Bifida Association are excited to bring you this live discussion on navigating independence for individuals with spina bifida and or hydrocephalus. It's great to be partnered with the Spina Bifida Association on these topical webinars. But before we start, let me get a few important notes out to all of you. Our speakers for our webinar are in no way compensated for their participation in the webinar. Sorry, guys, we're not giving you that $1 million check that I promised to get you on. Also, the Hydrocephalus Association and the Spina Bifida Association do not endorse or recommend any commercial products, processes, or services. Therefore, mention of any commercial products, processes, or services during this webinar cannot be construed as an endorsement or a recommendation. The information presented during this webinar is not intended or implied to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All content, including graphic text, graphics, images, information contained on or available through this webinar is for general information purposes only. It's a couple of housekeeping things. All participants will be muted for the webinar. Only the presenters will be able to speak, but I do invite you to use the Q&A box for questions. And I just want to differentiate the Q&A, the question and answer box, from the chat. We won't be monitoring the chat. It's very hard for us as we're in these active conversations to look at the chat, but we do have some incredible women backstage who are monitoring the question and answers box. So if you want to ask a question, make sure you put it in there. I might weave them into the conversation. We might save them for the end. Our speakers cannot offer personalized medical advice, and as they are not your specialists, so just remember that too, please. They're here to provide educational insights and share their professional experiences. So we kindly request that you keep your questions general and avoid sharing your personal medical history. You can find helpful resources in the chat or the resource box. We'll be sharing those with you throughout the webinar. And as you might have known when you came in, the webinar is being recorded, so it will be available on the Hydrocephalus Association's website and the Spina Bifida Association's YouTube page. So relax during the webinar. Don't feel like you need to take vigorous notes. You can come back to the recording later. Of course, I want to start by thanking our speakers for generously sharing their expertise on the transition and navigating independence for hydrocephalus and spina bifida patients. Now, let's take a moment to introduce everyone. We are joined this evening by Sierra Smith. Sierra, give a little wave. She has been with the Hydrocephalus Association Community Network, which is our support group leader, for the Eastern Pennsylvania region since 2014, before becoming the Support and Education Assistant officially on staff with the association in 2022. As a Support and Education Assistant, Sierra provides support for daily operations and helps to advance the goals of the Hydrocephalus Association by developing educational and support programs. She leads many of our online support groups. She was diagnosed with congenital hydrocephalus and had a shunt placed at 24 hours old. To date, Sierra has had 20 brain surgeries related to her hydrocephalus, and she's also living with Spina Bifida. Dr. Nick Dasher is a board-certified clinical neuropsychologist in the Department of Rehabilitation Medicine at the University of Washington, and he works with patients predominantly with traumatic brain injury, stroke, brain cancer, and hydrocephalus. Dr. Dasher has been with the Adult Hydrocephalus Clinical Research Network for 5 years as a co-investigator, and he is also part of the big multi-site clinical trial where they're assessing the efficacy of shunting on cognitive outcomes in patients with normal pressure hydrocephalus, which is the form of hydrocephalus that impacts people 60 and older. He's also involved in similar research projects with adults with previously unrecognized congenital hydrocephalus, with a focus being to identify biomarkers and subtle cognitive changes unique to hydrocephalus that could help determine which patients could be treated with shunting. It's great to have you here, Nick.
Thank you.
Andre Sam, coming to us from Las Vegas, Nevada, is a comprehensive disability and special needs planner with the Disability and Special Needs Project. Andre has 20 years of experience working with individuals who have a disability or special needs and has been in the industry for 12 years now, working and planning with individuals and families with special needs and disabilities. Andre works with over 120 organizations nationwide that cover approximately 60 various types of disabilities, disorders, and diseases, speaks at conferences annually, including our own, and works with families all around the country to help them plan for a better future. Andre, you give so much of your heart and time. I am an incredible, grateful recipient of your expertise. So welcome. We're so excited to have you here tonight.
Thanks for having me here, Amanda.
All right. And Julie Yindra, is that correct? Am I saying it right, Julie? Great. Is retired after a 32-year career in education. Most recently, she was the Director of Student Access Services at Hofstra University. Her career in education includes 24 years in higher education and 8 years as a classroom teacher at the middle and high school levels. Julie is active in the disability rights community and has presented lectures and workshops around the country on a variety of topics related to disability, higher education, and transition. She devotes time to nonprofit service for disability and health-related organizations, including serving on the board of directors for the Spina Bifida Association from 2004 through 2013. And she's currently serving a 6-year term on their professional advisory committee. Julie, it is wonderful to have you here.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So I want to open up tonight by talking about transition and making it real. And so I'm going to ask Sierra to actually start us off. And Sierra, tell me how old you are.
I'm 32.
32. So transition wasn't too long ago.
No.
But let's talk about that. So can you share a little bit about what surprised you as you were turned 18 and what you needed to start thinking about and doing, and what that transition looked like for you, the decisions you made, like where you went after high school, and then just share a couple of the challenges or, again, some of those things that you surprised you and caught you off guard, but then some of the things that you're also really proud of.
Yeah. So for me, transition didn't really start at 18. It kind of started more at like 15, 16, when my parents really started to talk about like, what did I want to do after high school, right? Like, what did I see being that path for me after my senior year? Did I want to go to college? Did I want to get a bachelor's? Did I want to get an associate's degree? Did I want to go to a tech school? So that kind of the thinking started early on that. Once I turned 18, I think the biggest thing that surprised me was the transition from high school to college was not as smooth as I expected it to be, particularly around accommodations, right? I expected just my accommodations from my IEP to smoothly transition to college, and they didn't, right? I had to meet personally with the Office of Disability Services on campus. That was a big thing. I was like, well, my parents don't just meet with like my IEP coordinator and handle that and figure it out for me about like what would work. And then figure out individually with each class what accommodations would be needed for each class, because each class is very different, right? Based on my major. So that was really interesting. And then not realizing that that wasn't the last step either. I had to talk to each individual professor on my own at the start of each class.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was pretty proud of myself having those conversations, right? And knowing after a while what accommodations I would need in those classes and advocating for myself. And saying, actually, I do need a printout of those PowerPoints because I'm not understanding things in class. And being able to go back to the Office of Disability Services and advocate for the need for those change in accommodations as the semester would go on.
And did you know that the Office of Disability Services existed before you went to college, or did you also have to kind of find that on your own?
So I was pretty fortunate that my mom is a teacher. And so I feel like I had a little bit of knowledge there from her within academics that she did some research too. And she was like, hey, just so you know, there's these things out here you should be looking into when you're looking at colleges. So she kind of helped me along with that. So I knew going in to look for those things at different colleges. Each college kind of has a different name for their Office of Disability Services, but usually if you kind of use those general terms, people know what you're talking about. Um, so yes, I personally did know going into college that that would be a thing to ask for or to look for.
That's great. I'm going to come back to some like some of the workplace stuff in a couple minutes, but I'm just going to level set here so that everybody knows. So I have a 24-year-old daughter who is actually a junior right now in college. She transferred to a college where she is living on campus after completing her associate's degree at a community college for 3.5 years. I think one of the things that you said that's so important, Sierra, is that your IEP ends at high school, right? So that is it. There is no IEP to take into college, because the IDEA, the legislation that provides for individual education plans from 0 through 12th grade through high school, stops once you graduate from high school. And I think that catches a lot of people by surprise. And I think you're right. You and I were both fortunate in that we weren't necessarily caught by surprise with that, but that didn't make the transition any easier to all of a sudden, my daughter having to be her own advocate and understand how to talk about her needs in the classroom with some of her learning disabilities. So before I even go any further with that, transition, what does that really mean? So a couple weeks ago, everyone, we had a webinar on transition that was all about medical transition. So tonight we are not going to talk about medical transition. We're going to talk about what it's like to make that decision to move away from home, or to go to college, or to drive, or to get that first job, to tell somebody that you're romantically involved with about your hydrocephalus, to tell friends about hydrocephalus, and spina bifida, and to tell coworkers about spina bifida and hydrocephalus. Like, how are you going to navigate this world now as an adult while you're managing your finances and managing all of your medical stuff? We won't forget about that, but we did already talk about that. So while you're managing your finances and you're creating this new normal for yourself as an independent adult, where, and I'm going to admit it, Mama Bear isn't sitting on top of you now, trying to get involved in all of your stuff and make all of your decisions. So parents out there, yes, I had a learning curve and I had to learn to sit back. And it was probably the hardest thing in my life to sit back. But just so we know where we're going to be talking tonight about transition. Okay, so we did talk about, IEPs end at high school. Special education programs are from 0 through K. So when you go into college, you now you're advocating for your own accommodations within the classroom. And Julie, do you want to jump in and talk about what that switch is like for a lot of families and how they experience that and what they should be doing.
Sure. I'll say just a couple of things because I know we're going to circle back.
Mhm.
But a couple of things that Sierra said really rang true for me. As a professional working in the higher education setting in that disability services office that lots of students need to come and find, I find, first of all, I get parents that call in the summer before the student comes to college and say, okay, now listen, my son has a disability. He needs extra time on his exams. He needs a note taker, but you can't tell him because he doesn't know.
Oh,
Wow.
because
Like,
he doesn't
okay.
know.
Right. Doesn't know. Right. And here's another one. Every fall, a student wanders to my office. And usually they look at the sign that says student access services above the door, and they look that way, and then they look that way. And they make sure no one's looking before they come through the door, right? And then he comes in and I say, hey, what can I do for you? And he says, well, my mom said I'm supposed to give this to you. And it's a sealed envelope. And
Okay.
what's in the sealed envelope is what Nick is going to talk to you about in a minute. But I say, well, what's in the envelope? He says, are you the lady I'm supposed to give this to? And I say, he says, I don't know. My mom just said I'm supposed to give this to you. And I say, well, what's in the envelope? He's, I don't know. Come on in. Let's open up the envelope. He's never seen it. He doesn't know what his testing says. He doesn't know the name of his disability. He doesn't know what his strengths and weaknesses are. And I'm like, oh, dear Lord. So my first message to parents is your students have to be self-aware and prepared to articulate their strengths, their weaknesses, and their needs before you ever send them off to college. And that's
And
what I have
that's
to
it.
say about that.
It's like Sierra said, she started at 15. And so as parents and everyone, Jen and Juanita are going to start dropping in resource links. And I know some of them are resources about timelines about when kids should be starting to participate in their IEP meetings and things like that. But it's so true. You have to, by the end of high school, your kids should be running that IEP meeting and they should be able to communicate what their needs are at the end of high school, which is so hard for the mama bears like me, who just want to make sure everything is getting done. Nick, you have a really phenomenal job. I'm just going to say that. But I think that you're the lost profession for the transitioning and adult communities. Because I think as parents, first of all, I don't think adults know that you exist or what you are. And so we're going to ask you to say that in a second. But as parents, we all take our kids to get neuropsych testing when they're young, right? Because our neurosurgeons tell us to go do that. And so we take the kids to get neuropsych testing. We maybe do it a couple more times as they're in different parts of their academic journey to get the educational testing. Sometimes it's done at school, in the school districts by a psychologist there. And then that's it. Nobody really realizes that there's a really critical role neuropsychology plays for adults at transition points, going to college and then going to work. So can you reflect a little bit back on some of what Sierra and I have said and what Julie has said, and also tell us what neuropsych is and where it fits into the adult world, both education and the professional.
Yeah, happy to. So, yeah, I'm a clinical neuropsychologist at the University of Washington. Been part of the evaluating patients with hydrocephalus, mainly adult onset, but as Amanda alluded to, a large portion of patients I see are those with unrecognized congenital. So folks who, seemingly were fine and then they had a concussion at age 40, 50, all of a sudden they've enlarged ventricles that have been there likely their whole life and we're not sure what we should do. But a small but very significant portion, and hopefully growing, are these transition patients that we see. So folks that are coming out of care from Seattle Children's Hospital just a mile away, and that a big problem is that transition seems more seamless with just the medical transition. And even that needs work, but usually it's just maybe a follow-up with the adult neurosurgeon or the adult neurologist. I happen to work in an institution that has a really great hydrocephalus center. I've worked with Mike Williams for a number of years, and but unfortunately, there's not a lot of centers that have this kind of level of expertise that we have. So I think for most folks that are transitioning, sounds like maybe Sierra's experience is like this, where you know, you kind of transition to adult healthcare, and you're like, okay, here's your adult neurosurgeon who's going to follow you now, and now you go be an adult. You'll figure it out. You know, mom and dad will help. And it sounds like Sierra, you had a my parents are teachers as well, so I understand actually just, you know, kind of that overarching knowledge base is probably vital for your situation. I can't imagine what it'd be like for folks in your situation who don't have parents who didn't have that knowledge based understand kind of that process. And you know, your mom still had to look up things as well, so it's a difficult part. So what gets lost in all that is the neuropsych portion. And when I say neuropsych, I mean really the neuropsych assessment, but with that, even psych, even vocational rehabilitation. So where we're developing our clinic here is that we'll see patients who are transitioning out of Seattle Children's into adult healthcare here, and I will do an updated neuropsych evaluation. So if they haven't had one within a year, just get updated testing. It may be maybe as extensive or more briefer than the one they had at a child, but we want to get an updated sample of what are their cognitive strengths and weaknesses. So what are their learning styles? How well is their attentional patterns? Are they more visual learners, verbal learners? These things are really important, and it's imperative to compare that to the pediatric scores, because I can really look at how that trajectory is going. I think what pediatrics does well is they'll follow to see if folks who are maybe growing into a deficit or not, or if they're kind of developing as expected based on age. But then at 18, we kind of stop doing that. And you know, the brain continues to develop and mature really into your late mid 20s. Like, we want to really know how's that developmental curve. And so my point is sort of making sure that transition is more seamless, and within that, kind of guiding that they're plugged into the right services here. So in rehab, we have a vocational department who helps with, you know, adults who have, you know, acquired brain injury, neurological disease, as well as hydrocephalus, who want to go back to school or transition into higher education or go back to work. And, you know, sometimes they just need a little bit of help with cutting through the red tape about all the bureaucratic paperwork to go through. Sometimes they need people to help understand, discuss different job placements, how to implement those, the results of neuropsych testing, and how to put that in practice at school. And so I'm there for the feedback. I've had conversations with schools about what more documentation they need to make sure these accommodations are still you know, available. Because you're right, I mean, we do need that updated testing. But students going into higher education, even though they're after age 18, like, they still have a right to those accommodations, but we need more updated documentation. So sometimes my role is just providing that written documentation, and sometimes it's more expanded, really be an advocate for that as they're going into it. But I think, and within that, just as you mentioned, you know, the day-to-day things of making sure, you know, how to make sure you're checking your finances, manage your medications, manage your other IEDLs, things that mom and dad were kind of doing a lot more of. And as Amanda has told me before, I like to, you know, gradually doing the parentectomy, sort of like, all right, sort of how much you can become more independent. And you know, because, you know, Mama Bear wants to help, but we also need to kind of find that balance. And so, you know, we have, you know, occupational therapy, and other services here to kind of help just with that transition. And sometimes it's can be as easy as one visit with me, one visit with voc rehab, and then a meeting with school to make that transition really seamless. If that wasn't there, things would be a lot harder. And sometimes it requires more work. But I mean, just that little bit of like follow-up goes a long way. And I think there's just too many kids, I don't know, not kids, you know, 18-year-olds that get kind of lost in that follow-up. And that's usually where neuropsych is kind of involved in that process.
So Nick, I just want to put it into tangible terms for our audience. So some of the testing that you do can help individuals understand how their brain is processing information, where some of their strengths might be, where some of their weaknesses it might be. So I know for my daughter, you know, she has a really hard time in big group discussions and crowds, right? Because it's just too much processing. There's too much happening, and she just doesn't know where to focus her attention on. So practically, you can pull out challenges that somebody might be facing like that, and then provide them with nice, solid tips. And then also in the school, the types based on what the testing shows, what kind of accommodations they might want to request. And then even in the workplace, how they could set up their desk to optimize their work environment. Can you talk about just some of the tangibles? I know we're going to lose you in a couple minutes, just some of the tangibles that you really provide to a patient.
Yeah. So so I'd say to kind of give an example, I think probably 99% of the folks that I see for neuropsych evaluation have maybe what they feel like is a memory problem. And so the testing we'll do is we'll really dig into all these different facets of cognition. So I'll look at how well somebody remembers lists of words, pictures, stories, other ways of presenting information. And then within that, I look at, rates of learning, how well they recalled it later. Did they learn it with more recognition cues later? And I look at that and then I compare that in context of how fast did they sequence things together? How well did they sustain their focus on a really completely boring, arduous task to see how well they can focus over long periods versus a situation where there's sort of distractions going on and how well they can do that. Because what I'm teasing apart is, all right, this guy's coming in, he's really struggling in class because he gets distracted really easily, he can't remember anything. But it seems like if you present him information in a really tangible way, like a story or context or structure, that sticks. And maybe, and then testing shows, but if you present things more rapidly and kind of a loose way that doesn't really make a lot of sense, that's going to get lost unless you really repeat that over a number of times. So this is somebody who's probably not going to pick up a lot of information in a really noisy atmosphere with everything going on around it. So if there's anything, guiding one-on-one conversations are going to be better. Being able, one's not going to have the luxury of maybe having a teacher repeat things over and over. So this is somebody who's going to need things to be recorded so that they can go back and hear that again to make sure they got that. But what it tells me is their memory is actually okay. This person's capacities to learn and encode new things into the memory looks great, but how that's presented is what's getting in the way. And so that's kind of an example of what the testing does. It provides sort of some tangible tips to go about that. So in my reports, I'll discuss things like that, for example, but also we can provide cog rehabilitation services too. So we have speech therapists who do a lot of cog rehab training that, some patients may or may not have been familiar with. I think a lot of times when people think of speech therapy, they often think of, kids with a speech impediment or a lisp or something there or swallowing disorders that needs help. But it's really, they do a lot more cog training. So how to, learn information more effectively, how to chunk information in your mind easier, how to organize your space more effectively so you're not overwhelmed too much and you can handle things. Because as I like to say, there's no such thing as multitasking. And often I hear that all the time, people, I can't multitask anymore. I could never multitask. Well, a common thing with hydrocephalus is just a slower processing speed. And some of that can worsen too in a really noisy environment or when other issues are going on, like poor sleep, other pain disorders, things like that. And processing speed is the key to being able to actually do multiple things, because what you're really doing is you're focusing on one thing, powering down, shifting your focus, powering back up, looking at it, powering down, shifting, powering back up. So when people say, I want to be able to they can't handle a lot of things, what they're saying is they can't shift as quickly. And my testing will look at how well they're really shifting. So, people vary in terms of how well they can shift. I'm sure we all have that mom who could shift really quickly and see you behind the back of their head. But, really it's, but with this, we want to know, right, like if you can do things in a way that you can manage your time with the right structure, limited distractions, and we know how you can learn information most effectively if it's in a structured context, you're going to do a lot better. But in the atmosphere you're in now, where it's too busy, and there's a lot of things going on, you're not able to kind of pull things together as quickly, and you're trying to manage all these things, in front of you, on top of maybe some general anxiety about your condition. Like you mentioned, people like the example brought in, where a guy doesn't even know what issues he has. He's kind of looking, make sure no one sees him walking into the ADA office. Like there's a whole psychological component to this too. And so that's not independent of the neuropsych portion, it's a component of it. But that's kind of where the whole piece comes together. So I think what neuropsychology does really well is that we have the time that a lot of providers maybe don't. Like neurosurgeon, you're at best going to get 10 minutes. Neurologist, you might get half an hour every few months. But neuropsych, you can get a more comprehensive eval. You have more time to kind of go over the results, do the evaluation more comprehensively, and really get into, what are these deficits? How do we really just, how do we figure all the pieces that are affecting you? Because I think there's more than just the neurological component of hydrocephalus. There's also the, component of growing up with this and how and the social impacts of that. The general anxieties that one has just growing up, period, and going into school and work. And that's just more compounded having hydrocephalus. So we have the time to kind of put that package together to kind
Yeah.
of put forth some of these services and recommendations. Does that can give you more
It does.
context?
And what I really want the audience to know is like, if you're struggling in an environment, and you're trying to figure out ways to support yourself and to be able to excel in that space, consider seeing a neuropsychologist and doing some testing and getting some help in figuring that out, because we have gotten incredible advice from our neuropsychologist on different things to put in place in, again, even in just setting up a room to optimize it for, the different challenges. And it's really wonderful. Sierra, Nick brought up a really interesting piece of hydrocephalus and spina bifida. And I kind of asked you about it, but we just didn't get to it when you were talking. There is, when you've grown up with this condition your whole life, there is a psychological component to it.
Absolutely.
And everybody's different, right? And everybody, how hydrocephalus and spina bifida impacts them is very different, both physically and cognitively. You can have two people with the same conditions and be completely different in how they're and in their different abilities and stuff. Did growing up with spina bifida and hydrocephalus make you feel different and make you feel disempowered in any way? Or did you feel like, I'm not going to let this?
Yeah, I very much had a I'm not gonna let this attitude most of my life. I would say disempowered, no. Different, yes.
Okay.
Mostly because of the frequency of revisions. From the time I was about 8 to about 18, so pretty much my entire K through 12 schooling, I was having shunt revisions every year. And so that was taking me out of school for about a week every school year, right? And so that does have an impact cognitively on you, right? You're behind in school and pretty much everything. You're behind in friendships on everything because everybody's moving ahead, right? On everything. So disempowered, no. Different, yes. If that makes sense.
So how did that impact you, like psychologically, in terms of deciding what you wanted to go into professionally? I'm going to switch into work now. I'm going to move into the workspace now with everyone. What you felt like you wanted to do, did it impact what you felt like you could do? Like, was what you wanted and what you could different in your mind? How did you navigate that? And what was it like getting those first, your first jobs and stuff?
So my journey to employment is kind of interesting. Leaving high school, I thought I wanted to work with animals. I'm a big animal lover. You know me, Amanda. I have a couple of dogs and I'm a big animal lover. I wanted to be a vet tech. I ended up going to a 2-year technical college here in Pennsylvania. And in my second year, I had a shunt malfunction and developed some post-operative complications. And for some reason, we don't really know why, had developed those. And we still don't really know exactly why. And that was in 2012. But all that to say, that led me to the Hydrocephalus Association, and kind of to a different path in life. I kind of left vet tech behind, and realized I kind of wanted to help people who were dealing with things that I was going through, right? On my same path. Because it can feel kind of lonely when you're struggling, right? When you're just down in the dumps on the condition and really just not knowing where to go. And that's why I love that we have these community networks. And I know the SBA has their own support networks too, and ways to just
That
find
you
community.
participate in.
Yes.
Yeah, and you
Yeah.
participate in the Spina Bifida ones as well, so which is great.
Yeah. And I love that we can find community, right? And so,
Well, what was your first job though? It wasn't with us.
well, yeah, actually it was.
Were your first job?
Yeah.
Okay, so you didn't have to deal with telling us
No.
that you had spina bifida and hydrocephalus, because we were like, hey, yay, you have spina bifida and hydrocephalus. Julie, what was it like for you? I mean, I know it was a while ago, 5 years ago, obviously.
Okay, so full disclosure, I was born in 1962.
Spring
So-
chicken.
I'm 62 years old. And when my parents in 1967 went down to our local town in Connecticut to sign me up for school, they said, no, kids like her don't go to school. There was no law. There was no school. So when I did finally go to school after my parents fought and fought and fought and fought and fought, and after the superintendent told my mother that I was retarded, I finally did go to first grade. And of course, I was the only kid with a disability in my entire schooling for the most part. I remember in when I was 7 in first grade, I remember the day that it occurred to me that I was different. It's when the teacher said, kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? And all the hands went up, and I want to be a fireman, and I want to be a football player, and I want to be a mayor, and I want to be da. And all of a sudden I'm sitting there and I'm realizing I'm becoming aware for the first time that I'm different from everybody else in the room. And so I went home and I was quite troubled by this. And my father comes home from work and he says, how was school? And I said, it's okay. So why, what's the matter? And I said, well, the teacher asked us what we wanted to be when we grow up. And he says, well, yeah. And I said, well, Dad, there's a lot of things I can't do because, I have spina bifida and I have these physical challenges and all these other things, right? And I said, what can I do when I grow up? And my father looks down at me and says, anything you damn well please, but seeking a career as a ballerina would be inadvisable.
I love that.
At 7, I didn't realize how important that message was, because what he was telling me was you have to find your passion, find your strength, find your path. Sierra actually used that word a couple of times, right? And the saddest thing for me with kids with disabilities is when they go off and they say, well, my father said that if I was going to go to college, I had to major in business. And I'm like, well, tell me about your disability. And he's like, well, I can't do math. Well, okay. So, as a student, it was quite different for me. And my first few jobs, my early life, my early adulthood was what I fondly began to refer to as the joys of screwing up. I bounced checks, I lost jobs, I had fender benders, I missed paying, I didn't pay certain bills, I really was not very good at the adulting thing when, I was starting out. But I have to give my parents a lot of credit. They were ahead of their time, right? Because I grew up in the 70s.
Yeah.
And they let me bounce checks, lose jobs, fail classes, because guess what? That taught me the most important skill that I have to this day, which is resilience. It's the ability to fall over and get up and brush yourself off and do it again. And
Okay, parents who are listening to Julie.
every person with a
Take it in.
disability needs that skill.
And isn't it true that we just overprotect, right? We're so scared that our kids are
Yeah.
going to feel like they've failed and it's hard. I want to bring Andre into the conversation because I want to make sure we're hitting on some of these big topics that people have asked us to address tonight. And Julie, jump in with Andre here. So Andre, finding your passion, figuring out what you want to do, you can actually get started at a younger age with Voc rehab programs that can get you into internships and paid jobs with state support. Can you just talk a little bit about how, how early people can start with their teens in that kind of job path?
Yeah, sure. So just a little background here real quickly, how I see myself compared to the rest of the speakers here. We got Sierra, who's kind of been through this recently and focusing on her medical as well as education and the job and the occupation component. And then Julie's kind of done the same thing as well. And Nick is from the medical part. If each of these aspects are important in our lives, such as the medical, like I said, education, occupation, and each of them kind of focuses on those things. If we were a football team and they were the coordinators, offense, defense, special teams, the role I kind of play is kind of being the head coach. And I provide that safety net and support so that each of these things can be put in place because I kind of have my hand in all of these areas. One of the areas of disability or special needs planning that is important is the government benefits. Now, it is since we have two different diagnoses here with spina bifida and hydrocephalus, and both of them have so much that is different. They also have a lot of things that are in common. And one of those things that's in common is that it's such a wide spectrum of capabilities for people. You could be walking by someone on the street and not even know that they have spina bifida or hydrocephalus, while walking by someone else and seeing someone who's is severely disabled. So it's a wide spectrum. So each and every person's circumstances is a little bit different here. But when it does come to the government benefits, there are a lot of things that you can tap into, especially when your child becomes of certain ages. So usually the two biggest benefit programs that are available to someone is when they turn 18, and that is Supplemental Security Income, or SSI, and that is handled by the Social Security Administration. And then there is Medicaid. Medicaid is your state health insurance plan offered by your respective state. Okay. Those two things do have some rules and requirements that are involved with them. You can get them before your loved one turns 18, but these organizations usually ask for the parents' income and assets as well. So oftentimes that makes someone disqualified from receiving those benefits until they're 18. 18, you're an adult and you are considered your own household. Okay. However, to Amanda's point, what she brought up was vocational rehabilitation. And this is a government agency that is available to people. And this agency focuses on the educational aspect of a person's life, as well as the occupational aspect of a person's life. Depending on the state you're in, is going to have certain age. You have to be a certain age for that program for you to be eligible to apply for that program. Some places it's 16, other places 17 or 18. Some places it's even as young as 14 or 13 or so. So it just depends on your state. I would definitely look into vocational rehabilitation. Like I said, it focuses on the education and the occupational component. The way I kind of view them is treat them almost like that rich uncle or grandma, grandpa paying for your tuition. I personally never had that, but other people may have. Use them to provide you with the help, supports, and services that you need, whether it is focusing on the education or getting a job in the occupation. They can focus on getting you medical equipment. They can focus on getting you technology. They can oftentimes cover various expenses that you have in school, whether it's tuition or books and room and board or various things like that. So vocational rehabilitation is something that definitely should be considered. Obviously, finances are a little bit of a taboo subject that we all don't really feel comfortable with discussing. I mean, if you did have a little bit of a less of a burden on your back, if you will, and having vocational rehabilitation kind of come in and pick up a little bit of that slack, I'm sure everyone in the household, everyone in your family could feel a little bit better knowing that it's not going to cost as much for that next stage in your life, whether it is occupation or it is, post-secondary education.
Are there any limitations with these programs in terms of what you can do? And I guess what I'm thinking now is, earning over certain amounts, issues like that, that would actually then take you out of these programs, whether it's SSI, SSDI.
So it's such a wide spectrum here. When it comes to SSI and Medicaid, yes, there are asset and income limits. Vocational rehabilitation, there are rules, but each state dictates its own rules, kind of like the minimum age that you can be to apply for vocational rehabilitation. So each state sets its own rules and provides its own programs and services. So you have to check with your respective state, or you can always give me a call. Happy to have a complimentary consultation with you, something like that. But when it comes to SSI and Medicaid, there are asset and income limits. The most amount of money that you can have in your loved one's name is $2,000 to qualify for SSI or Medicaid. And there is an income limit, and that income limit is right around $1,550 a month. It changes each year just depending on cost of living and all these other things that are calculated into the equation, but roughly $1,550 a month. Now, if you or your loved one, I'm not sure how many people are on this webinar that are the parents and caregivers versus the actual individuals themselves, but if your loved one or yourself, if you're the person in question here, is working and going to school at the same time, then you can have more of your income excluded from counting against you when it comes to your SSI. Because the more money you do make, the less you're going to get in SSI if or when you are approved for SSI.
I think one of the biggest challenges about these programs is that they're so complicated and that it's really hard to get accepted into them. So, and I know that that is a big challenge that both the Hydrocephalus Association and the Spina Bifida Association face in supporting a lot of members of our community when they need help, because their medical condition has taken them out of commission for 6, 8 months, a year, 2 years, because they're in back-to-back surgeries, they're trying to recover, whatever it is. So, Andre, talk to us a little bit about that game that has to get played with applying for SSI. And Sierra or Julie, if you have experience with this, either from supporting people or your own experiences, please jump in. I know that we were rejected, and so I'll just let that sit there. And I haven't even tried again.
So for what it's worth, when the person turns 18, you can apply for SSI, and majority of people do get rejected the first time around. I mean, I don't know how accurate it is now, but the latest statistic I got was that first time rejection rate or first time approval rate was roughly about 40-45%. And if you had no context to that, you'd say, wow, that's really bad. However, about 5-10 years ago, first time approval rate was right around 20-25%. So we have increased. Yes, it's that sad that so many people get rejected from being approved for SSI benefits. And it's one of those things that if you're Social Security, if you were Social Security and you were looking at it as a business, it's a smart idea to reject a whole bunch of people the first time around, because, hey, if I reject a whole bunch of people, there's going to be a whole bunch of people that get frustrated, they give up, and they quit. And every person that does that, that's a victory in the eyes of Social Security. So if you do, in fact, get rejected the first time around, you can appeal it. Know that you can appeal it. You can have an informal appeal where you ask them for reconsideration, submit any additional medical records, anything that may have not been submitted the first time around. If you still get rejected, you can request formal conferences. You can request formal hearings at a courthouse, as well as you can retain legal representation to fight these cases in the courtroom for you if you want. They don't cost anything up front. If an attorney asks you for any money up front to fight your Social Security disability, you may want to get up out of your seat and walk right out, because it is against the law for them to charge anything up front. How they get compensated is they get a percentage of the back pay that is owed to you when they win your case. Okay. So we don't want to get rejected, but just know it is possible. And so the best way you can approach this is putting your best foot forward and control what you can control. Put as much data and information in front of Social Security as you possibly can. Because what Social Security is looking at is, okay, so what if this person has hydrocephalus or spina bifida or whatever? Can this person hold a job that could provide them a bare minimum standard of living? Okay. I am not advocating for everyone to just live off the system here. I am on the same team as you, and that goal is for growth and development, whether it's education, occupation, just in life. Okay. We're here, and our focus is to provide you with as sturdy and as strong a safety net as you possibly can have, because as many of you do know, there can be setbacks in your life due to random things that occur, because we're talking about the brain and the spine and these things so vital to our well-being. And there's all sorts of things that can go wrong along the process, whether it's revisions to shunts or whatever it may be. And there may be setbacks along the way. So it's nice if you can have these things in place so that you can continue growing and developing while having these things. Okay. So if you do go through the process, put any and everything you possibly can in front of them. This is a little bit of where Nick can be helpful in this regard when it comes to the medical part. The neuropsych tests, those can be very helpful. Obviously, each and every one of you has a different circumstance. Maybe some of you, your loved one is a little bit lower functioning from a cognitive perspective compared to others. Okay. Use the resources that you possibly have at hand to put together the best case possible. Put any and all medical records, letters from either employers, previous employers, doctors, teachers, therapists, citing what this person is capable or not capable of. You want to get as much information as possible to submit to Social Security. That way you're making it as difficult as possible for them to say no the first time around. That's the best way to approach that part.
And I'll jump in here really.
Go ahead.
I'm going to jump in really quick, Amanda, because
Yeah.
you know, my situation, I never filed for SSI. I for 32 years. And when you work, a certain amount of your paycheck is set aside for Social Security for later use. When you retire, you get then to draw Social Security based on the amount of money that over time you put into that. However, what I told you earlier was I've just retired and I'm 62. So I'm not actually technically old enough to collect Social Security and be on Medicare, because I'm not full retirement age. And in the disability community, even those of us who have worked all of our lives, many of us can't work full time until, you know, we're 65. It's just not feasible, right? So I had to retire at 62 and file for SSDI, which is Social Security Disability Income, which is the stopgap monthly income that you are entitled to if you are disabled and can no longer work and you're not yet 65. So I did exactly what Andre just said. I inundated these people with documentation. I sat here at this computer and I scanned hundreds and hundreds of pages and uploaded hundreds of pages of medical documentation. Because the situation in my case was, well, you were working. So what's changed, right? So I had to be able to demonstrate that being a 62-year-old with spina bifida and all of the other medical challenges that I am dealing with is different from the person I was when I was Sierra's age with spina bifida, right? So in order for me to have enough money to live on, because I have a retirement account, but if I start drawing on it now, I'm going to run out of money really fast. So I'm trying to hang on until I reach full retirement age. So that Social Security disability income allows me to have a monthly income until I get to the point where I technically can qualify for those benefits as a retiree.
There's
Yeah.
another great benefit that maybe you, Julie, weren't able to take part in because, well, times have changed, laws, rules, regulations have changed. We obviously want your loved one to be a productive member of the workforce and get out there and work and do what they're able to. Okay. So I'm not talking about, getting the SSI and just sitting on your butt and doing nothing. Okay. Everyone has their own circumstance, and we want whatever that max capacity is, we want them to achieve that. If they are approved for SSI, that doesn't mean that they can't work. They can very much work. And it's kind of a fluctuating thing. The more money that they're going to be making, the less they're going to get in SSI, because you're going to be reporting that income over time. Here's the part that can be beneficial here. If your loved one is on SSI and they are working, they could eventually, once they earn enough credits, they could transition to SSDI, and they could do so if they earned at least 6 credits by the age of 24, they could transition to SSDI while they're in their early 20s. SSDI has higher income limits, and with SSDI comes Medicare. So it's very possible your loved one could be 25 years old and have SSDI, a job, Medicaid, Medicare, and they could even have their own private health insurance or stay on your own health insurance. And just so you know, your loved one can stay on your health insurance plan or their parents' health insurance plan past the age of 26. There are laws and legislation that came down about 10, 15 years ago that allows someone to stay on their parents' health insurance plan for life. You have to show that health insurance company that they have a disability, but if you show them, then they can stay on it. And in many states, there are health insurance premium reimbursements where you can get reimbursed for the health insurance premiums that you pay. So there are a lot of different benefits, programs, features. Know that these things are available to you, so it's not like you have to just go at it on your own. When someone gets approved for SI, they usually get approved for Medicaid. When you have Medicaid, there are things like Medicaid waiver programs. Medicaid waiver programs can provide you additional supports and services such as paid caregiving, respite care, occupational therapy, speech therapy, day programs, all these different types of programs and services that can help, whether it's yourself or your loved one, be able to continue pursuing the things that you want them to do and that they want to do.
I was just
and
going to
we're
talk
coming
about
to-
this. Oh, sorry,
go
Amanda.
ahead, Sierra. We're
No,
coming
I
to
was
the
just
top
gonna
of the
say I
hour,
was-
but we'll go over just a little bit. I just want to let our audience know. Jump in, Sierra, because I know that you have experience with this.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I was happy to hear you talk about that, Andre, the different programs that are available out there within SSI, SSDI that allow people to work, right? That was something that I had just navigated in the last couple of years, starting to work with the Hydrocephalus Association because I didn't become eligible for SSDI until I turned 18. My parents had applied for it when I was younger, were denied. At 18, because I became my own person, my own self, right, in the eyes of the law, I became eligible. I don't remember if I was denied the first time or not. I probably was because right, the rate is so high, but I did get it at 18. And so when I started to work, there was a lot of that, like, questioning, well, can I keep my Social Security? Can I keep my Medicare? Can I keep my Medicaid? I have so many things like medical supplies and medications that are like vital to my everyday health that I need to be able to afford, right? And obviously I'm working now and I have income, so I can use that income to afford these, but I have Medicaid and Medicare that's currently paying for these things or helping to pay for these things, and I'd like to be able to keep that. Um, and so trying to navigate all of that has been really interesting, and there are programs out there that can help you through that. So that I was happy to hear you talk about that, Andre. That's all I
Andre,
wanted to say.
Natalie
Amanda.
has a quick question that I want to just put in there because I think it's a question that a lot of people have. So she's 19 and she's got SSI and Medicaid. So and what she's asking is, could she have SSDI and Medicare and have a job without feeling like she's limited to the income she can have?
So if you're 19, you got SSI, you have Medicaid, and you do have a job, that's fantastic. You are ahead of the curve from where a lot of people are, for what it's worth. The more money you do make, the less you're going to get in SSI. But while you're making that money, you are also compiling credits towards your Social Security earnings record. You can earn up to 4 credits a year in Social Security. So it's basically 1 a quarter, essentially. When you earn 6 credits, if you do that by the age of 24, then you will transition from SSI to SSDI. The Social Security Administration will kind of oversee that transition process. And when you transition to the SSDI, then behind the scenes, you will undergo a transition where not only will you have Medicaid, but you will start having Medicare. I believe it's about a 24, 25-month transition period. So basically after 2 years, then you start having Medicare, where Medicare picks up more of the tab for those medical expenses. And yes, you can keep those things with higher income limits. Now, if you reach a point, it always changes. It's a little different, so I'm not even going to go into it. But if you do reach a point where your income is too much, for what it's worth, I mean, you're where you want to be. You want to be that, productive member of society. You're able to do these things on your own. We're not talking about, trying to rely on these things. So if you graduate where you're not able to get these things, you're going to have to weigh the pros and cons of, okay, if I scale back just a little bit of work, can I still receive a lot of these benefits? But if you're going to just blow past the limitations, then by all means, don't stop yourself from doing so. Like I said, the whole goal here when it comes to disability special needs planning and putting these things in place is to put as strong and as sturdy a safety net in place as possible for you to continue growing and developing just in a more structured environment.
So we are at the top, we're at 5 after. And so I just want to leave a couple of things for some people to think about. And as I'm saying these, Julie, Sierra, Andre, think about the own advice that you want to end with as well. This transition is a huge topic, and 2 webinars really wasn't enough. And I think that's a lesson learned for us. And maybe we'll expand for next year in 2025, because there's your medical transition and there's a lot that goes into that. Then there's also the legal aspects of transition, the everything Andre's been talking about the federal programs that are available that can help you with job training, finding a job, or getting assistance, financial assistance for school, as well as also SSI and SSDI that he spoke about for living. Then there's also the emotional components of transitioning. There's the parentectomy that Nick referred to that also needs to happen. So I'm going to just throw a couple things out there. If caregivers for a second, I'm actually going to talk to both caregivers and individuals with hydrocephalus who are in that transition space. Some things that I want you guys to think about. These are topics. You can email us to find more information on them, but some things I want you to think about. Decision making. Have you started talking to your youth, your young adult, about who wants to make decisions, if they want to make decisions on their own, if they want you to help them make decisions, how much they're going to let you in on that? Are there kind of rules around that? Like I don't want you to start emailing my professors or do what Julie's experience where they're sending letters in closed envelopes. You know, talk about who's going to make decisions once somebody's 18, because once your loved one turns 18, the legal ball is in their court. You are not actually, do not have to be allowed into conversations with school unless FERPAs are signed, or in the medical area, or legally, right? Kids are, when you turn 18, you can buy a house, you can get into a gambling debt and get into a lot of financial trouble. You can get arrested and go to adult prison. Okay, so think about decision-making, privacy, and consent. Think about those legal documents that you want to start having in place. Do you have a durable power of attorney for healthcare, for example? Young adults, do you have legal identification? Some of you might drive, so you have a driver's license, but my daughter doesn't drive. We didn't even think about it. And we're like, oh my gosh, wait a second. She's going to need a legal ID when she's 21 or 18. And so we went and got a state license. What's going to happen with health insurance? And then record keeping and turnover. Who is handling all of the medical records and bank accounts, shared bank account information, things like that? Moms. Let's just 1 second, moms. How are we going to turn over the documentation to our kids so that they can take over some of those decisions and then their own care? For parents who are supporting teens, talk to your teen or young adult about disclosing their condition and how comfortable they are about you talking about it. That's one thing that we don't think about when our kids are young. We're often like, oh yeah, and Sierra has hydrocephalus and spina bifida. Well, I even remember when my daughter got older, she was like, you do not have permission to tell people about my medical condition anymore. And I said, wow, okay, so that's really fair. So talk about those things. Who gets to disclose and when? It's also about supporting your kids making those decisions about who they should disclose to, because they might not want to talk about having hydrocephalus or spina bifida. But if they're in trouble at school, if they have a seizure, for example, for whatever reason, maybe they're in shunt failure and their roommate doesn't know, that's not a good situation. So who do you parents also need to tell your kid that you really want to make sure they know about the condition? You have to navigate those conversations. Mobility is huge. If your loved one isn't going to drive, how are you getting around? Are you comfortable with Uber? Are you comfortable with public transportation? Think about those things as you're looking at your independence. Explore opportunities to build independent skills. Vocational rehab is a great place where young adults, teens, there's a lot of teen programs in states where they can do employment training, do mock interviews to get jobs, and then go out and get jobs where they actually get an income from the state. The employer isn't paying them, but they're getting real life skills and jobs. Andre, did you want to jump in on that?
Totally up to you. I see that Jen put in a question about the power of attorney versus, alternate things. Is that what you're referring to, or were you referring to what you were just talking about there?
Oh, what I was just saying, but we can jump in about the power of attorney too.
So I know we're short on time and everything. Again, happy to provide you with a complimentary session or consultation. If you want, you can just email, call, text me. When it comes to when they're 18, just like Amanda said, they are a legal adult, have their own rights, and sorry, moms, dads, you no longer have the ability to make these decisions for them. So everyone has their own situation. Some people are higher functioning than others. If your loved one is higher functioning cognitively there, then what might be more appropriate would be a medical and financial power of attorney documents to have in place. Keep in mind, though, that with medical and financial power of attorney, they are flimsy at best. And what I mean by that is some agencies, some organizations, even in your own state, could simply choose not to acknowledge them, because they could look at it and they could say, you know what, I don't think that so-and-so was in their right frame of mind and capable of signing this document. That's the first hoop you have to jump through. The person themselves has to be able to understand that document. If they can't understand that document, can't do it because they can't sign that. So if you do need to, then you need to petition your local county court for guardianship over your loved one. Now, I could go for an hour about guardianship, but here's what I'll say
I know
to it.
all of these are huge topics.
Guardianship is more ironclad. If you need to have access to medical records, make medical decisions for your loved one, and it's in their best interest, then guardianship might be the route to go. If someone's going to be fighting you over that guardianship, the person themselves or another family member or someone, it may be a good idea to retain legal representation for it. Most states do allow you to do this yourself if you want to, but you can do it yourself, or you could retain legal representation to do so for you. What gets lost in the guardianship part is I'm taking away this person's rights and they can't do anything for themselves. It's not the guardianship itself that takes away the rights or takes away all their rights. It's the person that is the guardian that would be doing it, using that guardianship as a shield. Can your loved one retain their right to vote if you have guardianship? Yes. Can your loved one be able to drive or hold on to their driver's license if you have guardianship? Yes, in most states. Some states have it where full guardianship, no. Limited guardianship, yes. But just know that your loved one can do that. Can your loved one get married if you have guardianship? Yes. Just like some states where you can be 16 or 17 or some places even 14. Maybe some of you are there. Yes, you can get married. Just got to have the parent sign off. Same thing. You got to have the guardian sign off. Okay. So the underlying goal here that's forgotten in all this is that your goal is to have guardianship removed one day, because that will have meant that your loved one has grown and developed so much, it's no longer needed. However, for some of you, you may have to face facts due to cognitive incapacities that your loved one lags behind their peers right now. So guardianship is simply needed to help provide them with a safe and structured environment to continue growing and developing without being exploited, taken advantage of, things of that nature. Okay, so there's guardianship, medical, financial power of attorney. I'm not here to tell you that what is or what is not right or wrong about it for your situation. Everyone's circumstances are different. So guardianship is not just overall bad. It's not overall good. Same thing with power of attorney. It's up to you and what's going to be best for your situation.
And also up to the abilities of your loved one, in terms of whether they feel like they can make decisions and you feel like they can make decisions on their own. But it really should be a conversation. And the last piece of advice I want to give parents, some of the stuff that I had to go through before I turn it over for closing thoughts from our panelists, is think about that financial and life planning aspects of independence as well. So, for parents as well. So, one day, we're not going to be around, right? So trusts are things that you can think about. There are third-party trusts, there are first-party trusts. So, you might want to talk to a financial planner about that, where your money should go, and, a life insurance policy, for example, when you pass, where that money should go for your loved one or your child. And I know some of the things that we also think about as parents that we should discuss with our kids is, what type of bank accounts we're going to have. There are ABLE accounts that are out there. There are also just regular straight up bank accounts, and you can be joint on those accounts, or your child might not want you to be joint on those accounts. Again, it all comes down to decisions that you need to make together about what your loved one wants and how they want to be supported. And I guess I would say not necessarily all the time how we want to support them, but how they want to be supported. So lots of things to think about as, your child moves to independence, whether they have a medical condition like hydrocephalus and spina bifida or not. I mean, these are things that all of us parents are thinking about. So Andre and Julie and Sierra, I'm gonna let you guys close the webinar with whatever piece of advice or thought that you want to leave our audience with around transition, the process of transition, making decisions around transition, whatever you want to say.
I'll go first. So just kind of thinking about what I talked about with college and the transition kind of early, kind of thinking about talking to the young adults, think about what you're passionate about in life right now. If you're in those early stages of, junior, senior in high school, or even just a young adult, and you're still trying to figure out what you want to do. You know, I didn't have it all figured out at 18. I thought I did, but I didn't. Um, my path changed, and that's okay. But really, you know, figure out what your passions are and what you enjoy doing in life, and figure out what you can do with those things. And figure out, you know, is that going into the workforce? What jobs are out there around that? Is that getting a degree somewhere? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Really assessing what you can and can't do. But don't limit yourself, I would say as well. I think a lot of times it's easy to look at what we can't do. Look at what you can do.
Yeah,
Beautiful, Sierra,
it's
thank
it's funny that you just said that, Sierra, because what I was going to say was, look, first of all, have high expectations, right? Because your kids, I'm talking to the parents now, your kids are going to rise to the expectations that you have for them. So
Mhm.
have high expectations, right? I think that often, and Amanda kind of went, oh my God, when I was talking about this, but really seriously, failure is instructive, right? Failure teaches us how to do something differently the next time. We are all, as we try to go out there and become independent, or try to, you know, get a job, or try to take a class, we're all going to make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, and mistakes are okay. It's what you learn from that experience. When I would screw up, and I would call my parents, they didn't swoop down and fix it. They said, well, what are we going to do about that? By we, they meant, what am I going to do about that? Right. So my parents were involved. And the other thing is, a lot of times people with disabilities, we get this thing of, independence means never having to ask anyone for help. That is not true. Engage in help-seeking behavior. I gotta, look, somebody's gotta shovel my snow, and somebody's gotta mow my grass, and somebody's that, I have people that do things for me. It's not, independence does not mean you never have to ask anyone for help. It's knowing how and when and who to ask for help that's important.
Thank you so much for saying that, Julie. My daughter just feels like she shouldn't ask for help. And I'm like, oh my God, I ask for help every day. I love that.
To piggyback a little bit off of what Julie said there, yeah, there's dependency, and then there is independence, but that's not where it ends. There's interdependence.
Mm.
So if you think that independence is the top of the mountain and everything, no, it's being interdependent, realizing what you can and can't do, and getting the help and support where you do need it. That's the way you're going to maximize the opportunities that you have in life. I would say that the thing I would leave people with is, when's the time to start planning? Now. The sooner you start planning, the more opportunities your loved one is going to have for, education, for work, for all these different aspects of their life. The sooner you start planning and putting, the legal documents in place. I know it doesn't feel real at times when, they're a little bit younger. I have families I've planned with, and we're putting together revocable trusts and third-party special needs trusts and things like that. And you're not going to feel the immediate impacts, but you never know what is going to come tomorrow. And by putting these things in place, you are better prepared, and you're able to start maximizing those opportunities. Just take it one step at a time with this planning as well. It's not something that has to be done all at once. You're not going to accomplish it all at once. Most of the families I work with, it's over like a span of a year, maybe more, where we're planning and putting these things in place. It's one thing after another. A lot of these government benefit programs, it's the government. It's not going to move that quickly. So things just take in stride. You take one thing at a time, and before you know it, you'll look back and you'll say, wow, look at all the things I've accomplished. But you got to start somewhere.
Andre, that interdependence, gosh, that is such a beautiful, I love that. It's such a beautiful way to look at it. Can I steal that and write an article about that from a mom's perspective?
As I actually have that trademark, so you'll have to compensate me for that. But
Absolutely. I would be happy to compensate you. And everyone, you don't need to do this alone. Andre has offered his services. He does a free consult. And so we will send, his information is behind him. But we will also make sure that you have that. You can just pause the recording when you go back and you can get his phone number. And we are here, Sierra, Julie, myself, the Spina Bifida Association and the Hydrocephalus Association. We're here to be able to answer your questions. Feel free to email any of us here on the panel. Dr. Dasher also said that we can share his email with anybody who wants to ask any questions specific to neuropsychology. So just make sure you email us at the associations and let us know if you have follow-up questions. If you have ideas or topics for webinars in transition that you want us to cover next year, please send those to us as well. We can deep dive into a more defined, smaller topic. You know, we have great resources about making those decisions about college and some of the considerations you should make. I bet you Julie could weigh in on that. We could do a wonderful college transition.
Love to,
webinar.
anytime.
Yes, let's do it. And as well as employment. So we didn't get to a lot today, but we look forward to continuing this conversation with all of you. Please reach out to us, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening.